Hey guys, so think we're ready to start. So yeah. Hi, my name is John Palileo. I'm with Colin and Merlyn today. And today we're gonna talk about Klinefelter syndrome. So what is Klinefelter syndrome? So Klinefelter syndrome is where it primarily affects males and it affects they usually develop a additional X chromosome. Usually in this picture, you guys will see there is a two individuals who do not have the Klinefelter syndrome because they have an XY. Usually, us individuals, we have an XY chromosome for males, and the person who has the Klinefelter syndrome has an additional X chromosome, so it's XXY chromosome. So that is the visual understanding of a Klinefelter syndrome. It usually affects 1 in 50 males at random, so it's not, I would say, it's not being passed by generation. So another one is that it affects sex hormones. Since us males, we do testosterone. So it will affect the amount of sex testosterone. It also matters of impaired spermatogenesis, which is the amount of sperm that the individual who has the syndrome. Reason why is the low amount of testosterone. Sorry, the amount of sperm that the individual has. Though these factors do have more on disadvantages, the reason why is that it affects the quality of life and growth. Usually, when we hit, for instance, when we hit puberty, our bodies tend to change and stuff, and it's gonna affect the growth of it, just the facial, just overall growth with the facial hairs and stuff. So it's not going to be able to really, I guess, say matured enough, but it's not it's just not affecting it. So that's why. So I'm gonna give it next to Merlyn, and she'll be talking about the causes of Klinefelter syndrome.
So the major cause of Klinefelter syndrome includes the presence of an additional X chromosome in males. So the additional X chromosome has extra genes which disrupt normal development in males. And the major cause can be attributed to non-disjunction, which is a random mistake that occurs during meiosis. So the chromosomes divide irregularly during meiosis, and that process is referred to as non-disjunction. And this can produce an egg cell or a sperm cell, which has an additional X chromosome or an additional Y chromosome. So some examples could be when an egg cell with 3 X chromosomes is fertilized by a sperm cell with 1 Y, or when a sperm cell with an X and Y fertilizes an egg cell with only 1 X chromosome. So in each of these scenarios, the individual can end up having the syndrome.
Okay, so now we're talking about the symptoms.
So symptoms can vary or change depending on the individual's age. So in babies, the most common symptoms are weak muscles and slow motor development, as well as delays in speaking. But in teenagers, they may experience taller than average height, long legs, broad hips, as well as low energy levels. However, in adults, the most prominent symptoms are low sperm count, enlarged breast tissue, increased belly fat, less facial hair and body hair, as well as weak bones. So milder symptoms are also possible for a variation of the syndrome known as mosaic Klinefelter syndrome. This is when the additional X chromosome only affects some cells in the individual's body. And this means that the individual may not experience as severe symptoms, and it may be harder to determine if the person has the syndrome.
Okay, so the next one is on diagnosis. So how to know if you have Klinefelter syndrome? So there's 3 ways of knowing that you might have Klinefelter syndrome. The first one is karyotyping, which is in this case, it affects the division of, when it comes to meiosis. And it's, in this case, if it's, when they found out is that XXY, oh, sorry about that, the XXY chromosome. So it's one of them, and that it just affects the division, which is known as disjunction. Another one is hormonal testing, which is they usually test the amount of testosterone. If they do have that low testosterone, followed by other factors, it would lead to the individual having Klinefelter syndrome. Yet another one is known as sperm semen analysis, which was mentioned earlier in the beginning of the presentation of the overview, where it's the low amount of sperm, semen, sorry. So sperm, my fault. So this would lead to the less likelihood of, giving, I guess, reproducing of, so developing a child. So yes, I'll give it next to Colin, and we're talking about the treatment.
Yeah, so the treatment. As you might guess from how we talked about it, so because one of the symptoms is low testosterone, while there is no cure for Klinefelter syndrome, the best form of treatment for this disease is administration of testosterone, which is the hormone that is essential for sexual and physical development for males. So typically, when we want to administer testosterone, if we want to be most effective, we need to start it during puberty of a Klinefelter syndrome patient and continue it throughout the patient's life. So this testosterone is usually given through injection or gel patches on the skin. Those are just some common ways. But a big issue with this is that most people with Klinefelter syndrome are actually not diagnosed, especially not diagnosed by the time they hit puberty. So even though it's the best treatment, many patients will not get this treatment because simply it will not be diagnosed correctly through karyotyping, through testosterone testing, or sperm testing. Another form of treatment that isn't thought about as much is, recall earlier, one of the symptoms for younger people is speech therapy or learning problems. So if you give speech problems and learning problems, so if you give speech therapy, educational support, this can aid Klinefelter syndrome patients who might have language or learning problems. And once again, usually children with those type of problems are not going to be diagnosed with Klinefelter syndrome. But in any case, testosterone is going to be the way to best treat Klinefelter syndrome and mitigate some of the symptoms. And I'll pass it on.
Okay, thank you so much. And that concludes our presentation. Here's the works cited page, giving the credit towards the people who actually, towards, the website that we have cited, towards creating this presentation.